I admit it. I sued my own brother, and because of it, I lost my mother. I made the decision with a cold head, but the outcome wasn't cold. The day I filed the claim, I knew nothing in our family would stay the way it had been. I still went all the way. My father's funeral was at the beginning of November. The sky felt low, and the ground was muddy. People came, shook my hand, told me I had to be strong. I nodded and tried to imprint in my memory who I spoke to and what I said. Focusing on details helped. When you break a process into steps, the pain quiets down for a while. We came back home that same evening. Mom went straight into the bedroom. She didn't lock the door, but she didn't come out either. I sat in the kitchen and opened the expenses notebook. I already knew the funeral costs. What remained was the mortgage, utilities, the bank's automatic withdrawal at the end of the month. In my father's last months, he had no income. His modest salary stopped in spring. Since then, I'd been paying the loan entirely on my own. The apartment was a 2-room place in an old building on the 3rd floor. The balcony overlooked the courtyard where we used to play as kids. We took the mortgage 10 years earlier when we sold the old house and bought this one. Officially, my father was the borrower. No co-borrower was listed. Back then, I was working too, but the family decided the loan should be in my father's name. I was just helping. Helping slowly turned into paying. My salary hit my account on the 5th of every month. On the 7th, the bank took the payment. If I was late even one day, there was a penalty. I was never late. I was secretly proud of that. Order mattered to me. When everything else was falling apart, numbers still obeyed logic. I'm curious, what city are you watching from? Write it in the comments. On the 3rd day after the funeral, my brother came over. Levon is 4 years younger than me. He's always lived lighter. He changed jobs often, started one thing, abandoned it for another. That evening, he walked into the kitchen, poured himself water, and asked what we were going to do with the bank. His tone was calm, too calm. I told him I'd keep making the payments like I always had. There was no other choice. If we stopped even for a month, the bank would react. He nodded and said maybe we should think about it differently. He didn't say what he meant. I was exhausted and didn't have the energy to fight. Mom rarely left her room. The TV was on, but she wasn't watching. When I talked about the mortgage, she said only one thing: "You know best." Before, those words meant trust. Now they meant responsibility. I noticed the difference, but didn't give it weight at the time. On the 4th day, I opened the banking app and checked the remaining balance. 3 years left. The amount wasn't huge anymore, but it wasn't small either. I decided to settle the inheritance side of things too. We needed to handle the paperwork officially, if only to avoid problems later. I booked a registry appointment online. I had a habit. I didn't like postponing things. If something needed to be done, better to do it early. I told Levon I was starting to organize the documents. He shrugged and said, "Do whatever you want." That night, I couldn't sleep for a long time. My father's room still smelled like him. The closet door was left half open. I knew there would come a time when we'd have to go through everything, but it felt too soon. I kept thinking about documents. Where was the contract? Where was the original mortgage agreement? I remembered my father kept files in a blue Alchemist. The next morning I found it. The contract was there. Bank stamps, signatures, dates. Everything looked in order. Still, I decided to get an official extract. Formality didn't change much, but it gave me peace. When I submitted the request at the registry, the clerk asked if I wanted the full extract. I said yes. She told me she'd pull it from the system in a few minutes. I sat down and put my phone in my pocket. For the first time in days, I felt like I was doing something concrete. Back then, I didn't know that in that extract, next to our family name, there would be another name. I still thought it was just a technical procedure. On the way home, Levon asked again what I was planning. I told him I was just putting the documents in order. He said sometimes too much order creates problems. I couldn't tell if he was joking. That evening, Mom sat with us for the first time. She ate quietly. Then she said my father always wanted peace in the family. I didn't answer. I still didn't know peace was already over. I got the extract the same day. I read the paper twice, as if the words might move and take on a different meaning. Under the ownership section, it said, Levon G. The registration date was 3 years earlier. Basis, a sale contract for a symbolic price. Below it were the notary's name and the contract number.
My first reaction wasn't anger. It was coldness, like the blood left my body all at once. I sat right there on a chair and checked the address again. The cadastral code, the square meters, everything matched. It was our apartment. Only the owner had changed. The clerk asked if there was a problem. I said no. I put the paper in my folder and walked out. On the street, people moved normally, cars honked. No one would have known my life had just shifted direction. When I got home, Levon was alone. Mom had gone to a neighbor. I didn't take off my coat. I walked straight into the kitchen and put the extract on the table. "What does this mean?" I asked. He looked at it. For a few seconds, he didn't say anything. Then he shrugged. "Dad decided," he said. "He transferred it to me formally." "When?" "3 years ago. You know, back when there were problems with the bank. This was safer." I remembered that period. My father's job had cut hours. We were late with 1 or 2 payments. But then I started paying everything in full. I didn't remember any talk about transferring ownership. "Why didn't I know?" I asked. "There was no need," he said. "You were living here anyway." That sentence hit exactly where I was weakest. Like my role ended at having a place to sleep. I didn't grab onto emotion. I sat down and asked for details. "A sale contract for a symbolic price. What does that mean?" "It's formal," he said. "In reality, it stayed in the family." "Did you pay anything?" He looked away. "No, but that doesn't change anything." I pulled out my phone and opened the banking app. I scrolled through the last 3 years of payments, months, amounts, dates, every withdrawal from my account. "Who paid the mortgage?" I asked. "You, but—" "There is no but," I cut him off. "The property is in your name, and I'm paying the debt. When did we agree to that?" Levon gave a nervous laugh. "Don't exaggerate. We're family." That word was exactly what bothered me. We were family, but decisions had been made without me. At that moment, Mom came in holding a plastic bag. She looked at our faces and immediately understood what we were talking about. "You told her?" she asked Levon. "Yes," he said. Mom put the bag on the table and sat. "Your father wanted it this way," she started in a calm tone. "Back then we had problems. You were new at work. We didn't want any risk." "What risk?" I asked. "I was paying." "Exactly," she said. "You already had enough on your shoulders. We transferred it to Levon so if something happened, it would still stay in the family." The logic didn't hold. If I was paying, why was it safer for someone else to be the owner? I asked directly. Mom lowered her eyes. "At the time, we thought it was right. We means the two of you? I asked. She didn't answer. The silence was enough. That evening, for the first time, I felt like a guest in my own home. The rooms were the same, the furniture was the same, but the status had changed. Legally, I owned nothing there. I only had an obligation toward the bank. The next day, I went to the notary office listed in the extract. I requested a copy of the contract. They gave it to me officially. It said my father had sold the apartment to Levon for a symbolic price. Receipt of payment was confirmed by signature. The date matched the period when I took on extra work to cover the payments. When I left the office, I no longer doubted this was just a safety step. It was a transfer that had been hidden from me. I didn't yet know the reason, but the fact itself was enough. When I came home, I told Mom I'd seen the contract. She asked only one question. What are you going to do? That question told me she knew it couldn't stay like this. I didn't answer right away. I sat at the table, opened my laptop, and started searching for legal consultations. I pushed emotion aside. I needed the full picture. Levon paced the house, talking loudly on the phone. I caught a few phrases. I'll fix it soon. Don't worry. It won't be a problem. That was the first time I suspected there was another reason for the transfer. Maybe debts. That night, Mom came into my room. She rarely did that. We didn't want you to find out like this, she said. How else was I supposed to find out? I asked. When the time came. It's here, I said. She nodded quietly. Levon has problems, she finally admitted. Levon had problems. Mom said it like she was describing the weather, not a fact with consequences. I needed details. What problems? I asked directly. Mom pulled the chair closer to my bed and sat. Debts. It started a few years ago. He went into business with a friend. It didn't work. Then he took loans to cover it. Your father knew. Why didn't I know? We didn't want to put everything on you. The irony was so obvious I couldn't speak. Everything was already on me. Mortgage, utilities, household costs. Only the information wasn't. The next day I spoke to Levon alone. I didn't want Mom present. We sat in the kitchen. The window was half open, cold air coming in. How much is the debt? I asked. He avoided answering at first, then gave a number. It was almost half the apartment's market value. Who does he owe? I asked. A bank and a private person. The private lender worried me more. With a bank, you can negotiate. With a private lender, not always. And what are you going to do now? I asked. He tapped his fingers on the table. Sell. I already have a buyer. It's a good price. I'll pay the debts and everyone will have their share. Everyone meaning? I asked. Mom and me. He didn't mention my name, so I did. Me? He shrugged. You're living with us anyway. We can rent a small place for a while. Or you can come too. That sentence made it final. In his plan, there was no place for me. Legally, the apartment was his. In reality, I was just the payer. Do you have a contract with the buyer? I asked. A preliminary agreement. No advance yet. That mattered. If there was no advance and the sale wasn't registered, it could still be stopped. That same day, I met a lawyer. He was someone I knew from university, working on property disputes. I brought everything: extract, mortgage contract, my bank statements from the last 3 years. He looked through them calmly. Formally, the owner is your brother, he said, but you can demand recognition of your financial contribution, especially if you prove the payments were systematic and that this wasn't based on a family help arrangement. What does family help mean? I asked. If they prove you helped voluntarily and never claimed ownership, it gets harder. But if you show you were effectively covering the debt and the transfer was hidden from you, the court has grounds to suspend the sale until the dispute is resolved. How much time do we have? I asked. Until the final sale is registered. When I got home, I told Levon the sale wouldn't happen as easily as he thought. What do you mean? He asked. I mean that until my financial share is clarified, I'll block the transfer. You're going to take me to court? If there's no other way, yes. Mom stood between us, silent. Her silence was already a position. In the days that followed, the atmosphere at home changed. Levon was often out, speaking quietly on the phone. Once I accidentally heard him say, "If she won't agree, I'll be forced to." I didn't stop either. I organized my bank statements in detail. Every payment went into a spreadsheet. Date, amount, purpose. I calculated the total I'd paid over the years. The number spoke for itself. With the lawyer, we prepared the claim. The request was prohibition of alienation of the property until the dispute is resolved, and legal recognition of my financial share. When I filed the claim at court, my hand didn't shake. The procedure was calm. They stamped it and told me I'd get the hearing date later. When I returned home, Levon already knew. The buyer probably told him the registry restriction had appeared. "You really did it," he said. "Yes." "You're suing your own brother?" "I'm protecting myself." That was when Mom spoke for the first time. "This is how families fall apart." I answered calmly. "The family fell apart when you hid this from me." That night, Mom didn't come into my room. Levon lay on the couch with the TV loud. I sat in my room and felt there was no road back. A few days later, I got a court notice. We still had time before the first hearing. Levon told me he would hire a lawyer too. The process began. The family was officially split into two sides. Before the next hearing, I gathered more documents, detailed payment records, and official confirmation from the bank about the remaining mortgage balance. Coming home was the hardest part. In the court corridor, there was official distance. At home, there wasn't. That evening, Levon said, "You can still withdraw the claim." "And then what?" I asked. "We'll sell. I'll cover the debts. I'll give you back some of what you paid." "Some means how much?" I asked. He didn't give a number. "Exactly as much as is fair." I already knew fair meant different things to each of us. "The court will decide," I said. Mom added quietly, "Money shouldn't be above everything." Those words shocked me. I wasn't putting money above anything. I was protecting what I had already paid. But to her, the lawsuit meant betrayal. I brought an official bank letter before the second hearing. It clearly stated that the last 3 years of mortgage payments were made from my account. It also noted that the borrower was my father and that the transfer of ownership had not been reported to the bank. That detail mattered. The bank had never consented to the transfer, even though the mortgage was active. Legally, it strengthened the case. Levon was nervous about it. One evening, he said, "If you take this to the end, there will be nothing left between us." "There's already nothing," I answered. It was the first time I said it out loud. He didn't reply. At the second hearing, the atmosphere was harsher. The judge focused on the fact that ownership had been transferred without the bank's consent while the mortgage was active. Levon's lawyer argued it was a technical mistake. I watched the tone shift. It was no longer only about family help. It became about compliance with law and financial responsibility. At the end, the judge said the restriction on sale remained in force until the next stage, and the decision would be announced later. In the hallway, Mom looked at me directly for the first time. "Was this necessary?" she asked. "Yes," I said. She shook her head slowly, like she finally understood something. In that moment, I realized that no matter how the decision came out, we had already lost what used to hold us together. All that remained was the outcome. We had 3 weeks before the decision. Those 3 weeks felt the longest. At home, everything looked normal. Coffee smell in the morning, TV noise at night, doors opening and closing, but nothing about it was normal anymore. Levon barely stayed home. He came back late. Once I saw him counting cash in his room and hiding it fast when I opened the door. I didn't say anything. I no longer wanted to dig into where the money came from. Mom became quieter. She avoided speaking to me but whispered with Levon. A few times I noticed her stopping at my door like she wanted to say something, then turning back. During that time, the lawyer told me the decision might be partial. The court could recognize my financial share without canceling Levon's ownership entirely. That could mean co-ownership for me based on the proportion of payments or compensation. I wasn't thinking only about property anymore. I was thinking about what it would mean to stay in that apartment afterward. If the decision favored me, could Mom still live with me? Could I live with her? On the day of the decision, I went to court alone. Mom and Levon arrived together. Their physical closeness was obvious. I stood a few steps away. The judge read the decision in a calm, even tone. The text was full of legal terms, but I understood the core quickly. The court found that the transfer of ownership took place while the mortgage was active and without the bank's consent. The main financial burden of the mortgage during the last 3 years was covered by me. These circumstances created grounds to evaluate my financial participation legally. In the end, the court recognized that the apartment was an object of shared interest and established my co-ownership in a proportion based on the payments I had made. The restriction on sale remained in force until a co-owner agreement or additional legal procedure was completed. It wasn't a total victory in the sense that the apartment didn't fully become mine, but it meant one thing: Levon could not sell without my consent. In the hallway, Levon looked at me directly. "Are you satisfied?" he asked. "No," I answered honestly. "It was just the only way." Mom stood quietly, then said, "Now we have to come to an agreement." But agreement now meant something else. Before, it meant trust. Now it meant legal negotiation. When we came home, the atmosphere changed for good. Levon said he couldn't live here under these conditions. He needed freedom to make his own decisions. "You can buy out my share," he said coldly. "The price?" I asked. He pointed to full market value as if nothing had changed. I told him I couldn't pay that amount all at once. An additional bank loan was possible, but it would mean more years of obligation. That evening, Mom came into my room. This time she wasn't defensive. "I'm going to move in with Levon," she said calmly. She said it simply, like it had been decided for a long time. "Why?" I asked. "He needs me more right now." That answer was final. I didn't argue. I knew her choice wasn't against me. It was tied to her fears. She feared Levon would fall into debt again. She feared being alone. A few days later, Mom packed her things. Not much. Clothes, a few photos, my father's watch. The sound of the door closing was sharp. In that moment, I realized the apartment walls had become truly mine for the first time, and completely empty. Levon left 2 days later. He said he'd stay with a friend temporarily and we'd talk about his share later. I was alone. The rooms looked strangely large. In the kitchen, only one cup sat on the table. I still had to pay the mortgage, but now it wasn't a subject of dispute. It was my responsibility for my own property. That evening, I stepped onto the balcony. Children were playing in the courtyard, like before. Outside, nothing had changed. Inside, everything had. The court decision on paper was fair. I protected my work, my payments, my years. But in that process, I lost the family tied to that apartment. Now I had to choose: buy out Levon's share and finish this story, or leave things as they were and live in constant legal tension. I already knew half decisions wouldn't work in my life anymore. Buying out Levon's share wasn't an emotional step. It was a financial task. I sat down and ran the numbers again. My share was already defined by the court. The remaining part was his. If I bought him out, the apartment would be entirely in my name and the dispute would end. If not, every move would require agreement. I went to the bank for a consultation. An additional loan was possible, but it meant tying myself down for 5 more years. My salary was enough, my credit history was clean. The manager asked if I was sure I wanted that obligation alone. I told him I didn't have another choice. That evening I met Levon at a cafe. Talking at home didn't work anymore. He said directly, "If you're buying, decide now. I need money." "I know," I said, "but I can't set the price at the absolute market maximum. The court already set the proportions." He gave a cold smile. "You won. Now don't torture me too." That word, won, still sounded wrong. I didn't win anything. I just didn't lose everything. The negotiation didn't take long. We agreed on a realistic amount. Less than what he demanded at first, but enough to cover most of his debts. We scheduled the contract with a notary. I told Mom about the decision myself. On the phone, her tone didn't change. "That's better," she said. "It'll end once and for all." "What are you going to do?" I asked. After a short pause, she said, "For now, I'll stay with Levon." That "for now" hit a lot, but I didn't pull at it. Signing the new loan felt heavier than filing the lawsuit. In court, I was defending what already existed. Here I was taking on a new burden. I knew the next years would be strict financially. At the notary, Levon was tense, but he was clearly relieved. When the money hit his account, for the first time, "I hope you're satisfied," he said. "This isn't satisfaction," I replied. "It's just an ending." We registered the documents. A few days later, the extract showed only my name. For the first time since all of this began, I saw my surname alone in the ownership field. When I got home, I opened the blue folder again. I pushed the old contracts aside and placed the new extract inside. Date, stamp, signature. Officially, it was over. But the apartment stayed empty. Mom called rarely. The conversations were short: weather, health, small daily things. Neither of us mentioned the court, the transfer, the money, as if that period didn't exist. Once I asked anyway, "Are you going to come back?" "This is my home too," she said, "but now it's different." That different captured everything. The walls were the same. The relationship wasn't. Levon left the city soon after. I heard he moved to another place for work. Our relationship shrank into formal messages, documents, bank details, logistics. No personal talk. I returned to routine. Work in the morning, home in the evening. The mortgage payment happened automatically, but now it was my choice. Sometimes at night I sat in the kitchen and wondered whether it was worth it. The answer wasn't simple. If I hadn't sued, the apartment would have been sold. I would have ended up renting, without the money I'd already paid. Maybe Mom would still be with me. From the outside, everything might have looked peaceful. But inside, I knew a decision that could be hidden once, could be hidden again. Trust was already broken, and without trust, living together would have been only a matter of time. Now the apartment is entirely mine. Legally, clean, registered, protected. But sometimes, when I step onto the balcony and look down at the courtyard, I realize the voices are gone. Not my father's heavy steps, not my mother's quiet murmurs, not Levon's laugh. I protected the property. I lost the family. It's hard to judge someone, but I'm curious. What would you have done in my place? Thank you all for your attention. Please subscribe to the channel.